Recording. There we go. Very good. Calling the meeting of the Climate Policy Commission to order. The first item on the agenda is the minutes. Is there a motion?
I have a, I guess after, I'll move approval.
Is there a second? Thank you. Discussion?
I believe the last item on the agenda alluded to the responsibilities that I assumed. And one of those was in fact the carbon note, but there was a second one, which is the city's elimination of natural gas in its future buildings.
Yes, that needs to be corrected.
Okay, I made a note to go back and check that.
Thank you.
And I actually had another thing. I thought, Bob, that you had volunteered to lead preparation for the USDA Council Education. And since we don't know when that's going to occur, the thought was that you would go ahead and start figuring that out. That sound right?
Yep. I mean, we did mention that last time. I haven't done anything on it since, we did talk about it as something to start working on.
Right. So I think that should be included in the minutes as well.
It's on my radar screen anyway. I just didn't get to it this month.
Right. Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor? Ray, we can't see you. Okay. Next item is council update. Tanya?
Great, thank you. And I apologize for my delay in getting on today. It seems like every Zoom call I've been on today went 1 or 2 minutes late, and here we are at the end of the day. So a couple things are happening. The first is that I believe we have an applicant for the commission, Caitlin Guthrie, and I've talked to her, and I believe Rick has talked to her as well. So it's back to the mayor. Hopefully we'll see that on the agenda for the Tuesday meeting. But if not, we'll check in and see what that looks like. Very excited to be bringing her on, hopefully, and getting more hands to the work. So that's potentially good news. And Rick, you might want to talk just a little bit. I know that you've been doing some follow-up with Mayor Akins, trying to get some time to talk with her about some of the priorities that she was looking at in terms of climate in follow-up to the report that you gave, I think 2 meetings back. So I know that you're trying to get that time set up with her so that we can talk about her priorities in relation to what the commission has put forward. And then probably the biggest issue that has a climate component in front of us right now, I haven't seen the agenda for this upcoming meeting, but we're expecting to have the second conversation about the Rogue Valley sewer services and whether it's a good idea for us to take a hard look at possibly joining that system. And there are some pretty significant climate questions, I think, that need to be thought about in terms of all of this, both from an adaptation and a mitigation standpoint. I've put together a memo to the council for the packet this time, just outlining what I think those questions are that we need to be thinking about for both adaptation and mitigation if we are to behave and make decisions that are in accordance with the SEEP. So I don't know where we're going to be at this meeting, but what is in front of the council right now is a decision about whether we invest. It will be at least $230,000 in a feasibility study that's looping into the Medford Water Commission's current study that they're doing in their negotiations with DEQ. So they're looking at their whole system, what its capacity is, all of that. If hooking into Ashland is something that we want them to consider in that larger analysis, then we have to show up with I believe it's $232,000 that it needs that they need to incorporate that into their current capacity study. So that's what's in front of the council at the moment. I realize that this group doesn't have time to really respond to it, but I just wanted to let you all know that that's happening, on Tuesday. And then I think that's all
Tanya,
I have. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
So then that would affect our wastewater collection master plan if we decided to do that?
It would. So if we were to go forward, there are a couple of different ways that we could potentially tie in to that system. We could, hand the whole thing over to Rogue Valley Sewer Services. We could handle the collection ourselves and have them simply do the treatment. There's a variety of things. But one of the concerns is that if we have our wastewater treated at the Medford facility, we lose control of that treated water. So it is now being dropped right into the main stem of the Rogue River out of the Medford facility instead of into the Bear Creek up, upstream, which is where it will be being put once we switch it. Right now it's dropping into Ashland Creek, but we are actually changing the outfall to Bear Creek. So anyhow, there are some big issues, I think, that we need to be thinking about on the climate front there. So that's why I put that memo together. And then the last piece, did you have a question, Bob? I saw your hand go up.
I guess I did. Yeah, I just wanted to comment on that as well. And I watched the study session, and I guess I found it both encouraging and a little bit alarming. Encouraging that a number of councilors and the mayor talked about the environmental impacts, and important to keep in mind environmental impacts, including climate, and to referred a couple times to the SEEP. That was all really very encouraging. I think what I found alarming is that there were some, I think unfortunate misanalysis of what the climate impact would be and what the greenhouse gas emissions impact would be. So I think it would be really nice, and maybe that's what your memo is about, but they didn't ask for any analysis from staff on that, while some councilors were actually saying some pretty forward-leaning things about how this interconnection would actually reduce Ashland's climate greenhouse gas emissions. So, there needs to be some way to, I think, put some bumpers on on the analysis, on climate analysis, on some of the council decision-making process.
Well, and that's what I'm hoping with the memo that I put together. It was really just, here are some things for us to think about in relation to climate. And one of those was that if energy is being expended in Medford to process our waste that used to be expended in Ashland, we're not necessarily making a climate gain. It's one, from a mitigation and a standpoint, I know we all know this, there is one budget and it's global. And so we don't do better with SEEP by moving those emissions outside of our city limits, unless there's a fundamental reason that it is lower emissions by doing that. But in fact, we will have to pump that raw water for at least 5 miles to Talent, potentially further, depending on what happens once you leave Talent with the current water collection system. If it's a gravity fed one, they won't have to pump it past Talent. But if in fact Talent's water is being pumped to the Medford treatment facility, then ours would also have to be pumped from Talent. And so there are some very significant long-term energy questions that I think council needs to be considering as they go through this process of determining whether it makes sense for us to invest further in a feasibility study. So that's what's in front of us. That's what we're going to be talking about on Tuesday evening. And so, I don't know, Rick, if you have any thoughts about this, but I recognize that with this coming up so quickly, there may not be much of an opportunity for this commission as a whole to weigh in on this by Tuesday. But depending on where the decisions go on Tuesday, there might be a need for further analysis by the staff. I mean, by this commission as well as the staff. Any other questions on the wastewater treatment facility?
Well, I guess I do have a comment on that, because I was fortunate enough to be able to see your memo before this meeting. And I also went back and looked at the staff input that was prepared, although I did not watch that meeting. And my conclusion right now is that to analyze what the overall impact would be is highly complicated technical economic analysis. And I think it might be difficult for CPC to just jump in and do much with it. It's possible we could do some sort of back of the envelope analysis to see if it's a sensible thing from first principles. But from what I've seen from the staff analysis, that seems unlikely to me. It actually is a very difficult analysis that really requires, I think, professional analysis. So whether it's worth it for the city to spend a few $100,000 on doing that is something that I at least don't have any advice on at this time. And so I think the question will be whether this commission wants to jump on this and think about it or not. I don't have a recommendation even other than what I've already said. Gary?
Tonya, did your memo recommend that that decision be at least analyzed in the context of climate impacts? And if not, should we as a commission recommend to the council that any such analysis should in fact include, that is, should we task the Medford consultant with the responsibility of analyzing the climate impact of shifting Ashland's wastewater to Medford?
Well, the question in front of the council right now, because we do have a series of master plans that address this, that are already in play, is should we at this point invest in that analysis at all? Right? That's the first conversation. If we say, yes, we should invest in that analysis, then of course, climate needs to be a major element of it, which is probably going to increase the cost of it. I don't know that the current add-on includes a climate analysis. Initial viability analyses often don't include climate unless it's specifically asked for. So it could be even higher than 232. So those are the two questions. Certainly if the council moves in the direction of wanting to look into this more closely, climate is going to have to be a major element of that. And I'm certainly happy to convey that to the council. The bigger question I think right now that council is grappling with is, on balance, is there enough potential benefit to warrant this kind of investment in a feasibility study? And that's, so that I wanted to bring it to all of your attention, because I think some of the major concerns that have been brought up are around climate adaptation and mitigation in relation to moving that massive system and all that water. So, again, I don't expect the commission to have, much to say about it at this point, because it's brand new and we don't have an analysis. And so, but wanted to let you all know that this is happening, and it's potentially moving rather quickly.
Maybe going along with what Gary is suggesting, would it make sense, and what Rick said, would it make, given the fact that there has been some discussion at the city council about this decision with SEEP in mind, would it make sense for this commission to take note of that and then recommend or just further note that it's a non-trivial analysis and would need to be carried out with the level of professionalism and care in order to actually decide to proceed with that decision, if in compliance with the SEEP, it can't be taken for granted that it is actually going to be consistent with the city's climate and energy action plan, and that would need to be part of the decision-making process. And if that's added to the consultant's doing the Medford Water Commission analysis, then so be it. And that should just be something that the city decides to take in to fund along with that $230,000. But you can't just assume it. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. So I think we're at the point where we either have to choose to do nothing, or we need to have some commissioners step forward to draft a memo along the lines that we've been discussing and send it off to council. And given the timeline, there would be no chance for this commission to approve it. So it would have to be, make it clear that it's not the entire commission, that the entire commission is concerned about this, but that the details are the product of a small work group. Does that make sense to everybody?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think we've actually gone far enough today that we could actually, maybe we should make a motion. I have to think about how to formulate it that just takes note that this is happening and then encourages the city council to take this decision, in connection with the SEEP and carry out the analysis and fund the analysis that would be necessary in order to do that.
Okay.
The only thing that I would add. The only thing I would add in there is that it's not a foregone conclusion that this council is going to invest in that viability study, right? So I would just, think about it in that terms. If you're going to make a statement, that there's an if-then kind of clause in there,
exactly.
Because we're so far, we're very early on. But staff is supposed to be bringing back to us what do they think it would take to do the full analysis, and we asked for ecological assessment as well of not having the water in Upper Bear Creek, but the climate element of it is something that that's an climate adaptation element, but the rest of it is may or may not be included in that 232. So it's entirely up to you. I think it was, for me, this is more of a heads up to this commission that that's where the conversation is, and that there are major questions right now about whether it makes sense to move forward with that investment into a viability study, a feasibility study.
Right. So Ray, and then I'd either like to hear a motion or we'll need to move on. We have a lot of other things to do tonight.
Yeah, I was just wanted to ask, what's the timeline for this? Because I would kind of agree that for the council to approve $250,000 for this Tuesday, it's probably not going to happen. So it could.
The deal is that the Medford Water Commission is in, not the Medford Water Commission, but the Medford treatment plant is in the middle of its feasibility study. And when they came and talked to us at the last study session, what they said is, if you're interested in being part of this feasibility study, we need to know very quickly so that they can alter the scope of work. So it's actually moving a lot faster than it might normally because of those circumstances.
Okay.
And so council could potentially approve this on Tuesday. Like I said, I will certainly, if council goes in the direction of wanting to do this feasibility study, I will certainly bring up the need to make sure that it is explicitly assessing climate mitigation and adaptation needs. And so, I don't know what,
I think that would be sufficient.
Yeah, in this sense, I don't know. I don't have a recommendation for the commission because this is one of those places where my two roles, I think, need to be separated.
Right.
Okay. So does anybody want to make a motion to this topic? If not, I'd like to move on. Gary?
I move, assuming that the chair is willing to draft the note to the council expressing the commission's request that if the council does choose to move forward with the Medford sewage treatment plant feasibility study and Ashland's potential inclusion in that scope, that our contribution also includes sufficient funding to, in fact, address climate impacts.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Ray, are you voting one way or the other?
I did not vote. I mean, I did not raise my hand.
Okay. All opposed?
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Okay, so it carries 5-1.
My last piece of the update is that Stu has requested that the mayor sign the city on to the Race to Zero pledge. And if it happens by tomorrow, then we would be one of the communities announced at the COP26 gathering. If it happens after, then we'll miss that deadline. But we've Councillor Steffinger and I have put it on the agenda for this upcoming Tuesday, in case Mayor Akins hasn't had a chance to get to that decision, at which point council may choose to sign the city on. So that's coming, and that's in the packet materials. And that's it for my update. Okay,
thank you, Tanya. Stu, staff.
Two quick follow-ups from that. One, Tanya, do you need me at that meeting, assuming it's a discussion?
Yes, I had asked I'd asked Gary to make sure that you are waiting in the wings in case there are questions.
Okay, I'll clear my schedule for that evening.
And it might become a moot point by then, if we hear back from the mayor.
Okay. All right, and then the other thing is I'd like to read this motion back and make sure I got it right. I move CPC author a note expressing the commission's request that if City Council does move forward with the wastewater treatment plant feasibility study, that our contribution is sufficient to address climate impacts. Close enough? I'll look at the recording too, but I just want to make sure everyone.
Yeah, I think Gary actually said that the chair should put that together.
Right.
Send it off.
Oh, okay. CPC chair.
Right.
All right. Very good. Thank you.
And the only reason I voted against it was I thought I'd wait until to see whether it's approved or not. So that was why I voted the way I did.
Okay. Well, I think it's going to be a relatively short email that I will send to council. Okay. Any other announcements from all of you?
Do you want me to do my staff?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'll keep it short. Just, I've been really bogged down since Elizabeth left. I have a new appreciation for how much work the commissions take. And thanks for hanging in there with me. Some things that are on the radar. I'm still working on this electric vehicle car share pilot program. Everything's lined up for that to happen. We're just kind of waiting for the project manager to hit go. That's with Fourth Mobility and a bunch of other utilities that are participating in that. Spent a fair amount of time on the home energy score that we'll talk about later. And also there's been a bit of a renewed effort. I was part of a group last legislative session that was advocating for HB 2398, which was the REACH code building efficiency. And that's going to be rekindled this next session, hopefully. So folks are mobilizing on that. If anybody's really fired up about it, let me know and I can pull you into the loop. Why don't I just leave it there for now?
Okay, thanks, Stu. So now, are there any other announcements? Gary?
I'd just like to remind the Commission that the Department of Land Conservation and Development will be holding a listening session for Southern Oregon on October 25th, 6:30 to 8:30. I believe Stu has distributed information on that. I would encourage you to participate. And if you do, I would also encourage you to express your support for the designation of protected bicycle ways on arterial and collector streets.
Okay, anybody else? Seeing none. Stu, I presume there's no other commission representatives?
Not that let me double check. Nope.
Okay. Public forum, we had a submission from Louise Shawkat about whether basins might run dry and the sustainability of hydropower and various things about the Bedford water treatment proposal. So thank you, Louise. Let's see, next meeting. As we discussed at the previous meeting in September, the next meeting overlaps with the holiday and Stu's not available. I also indicated that I'm going to be out of town quite a bit in early November. So I'm not available from the 2nd through the 15th. And so we need to decide a new date. I can throw something out there and see how you folks want to react to it, or how do we want to go about doing this?
That sounds good to me.
Okay. I would propose that we move to 4 to 6:30 on either Wednesday, November 17th or 18th, Thursday the 18th.
So the 17th, there's overlap with Conservation Commission. So
Okay.
I won't be available at that exact time, but
Okay.
later on in that day might be possible. 18th is good.
I'll be traveling, and my availability on either of those days is somewhat in question.
What was the time again, Rick?
Well, I was proposing that we stay at 4 to 6:30, but that could be changed as well. So if somebody has conflicts on both of those times, then I'd like to hear a counter proposal.
I can make the 18th, but not the 17th. I have something from 2 to 6 on the 17th. Otherwise, it's open.
I'm available on the 18th.
18th's okay with me.
What did you say, Chris?
The 18th is available for me, not the 17th.
Okay.
Same with me.
How about you, Bob?
I'm available on the 18th or the 17th, but it sounds like the 17th is impossible for Stu, so we don't have a...
Yeah, well, but the other thing I wanted to find out, Gary, when would you be confident that you'd actually be able to attend?
Earlier that week, but between the 18th and the 25th, I'll be out of town, and it's possible I could attend. I just, you know, when you're traveling, you can't have total control over your calendar, so.
Well, it sounds like we got 5 of 6.
Yes, but we can't lose anybody if we're going to have a quorum.
If we're lucky, we'll have one more at the next meeting.
Right, so the other alternative is to schedule this sometime when I'm gone, but then we need to elect a vice chair and figure that all out. So if we're all good with the 18th, then that's probably the best way to move forward. So Tanya, was there some particular time that you needed on the 18th? You're muted.
I know. I am free except 2 to 3.
Okay, so my proposal is that it be the 18th from 4 to 6:30. And I think everybody has now confirmed that that will work. So that'll be it. Okay. Next thing is the vice chair election. There was a list of responsibilities included in the agenda. I'd also like to add that I think it'd be best if whoever is elected vice chair would be willing to carry on as chair, because I'm not able to do that this next May. But obviously that's not a requirement. So are there nominations? Gary, I think you might have said something, but you're muted.
Sorry, how about volunteers?
would volunteer, but I can't.
Well, I think I'm allowed to nominate people, so I'm going to nominate Ray.
I second that.
I can't accept. Not with being chair.
Well, at this point, all we need is a vice chair. We'll have to sort the rest of it out later if nobody else is going to step forward. So,
I second.
Didn't he just decline? I
think he declined signing up to be the chair this following.
Oh, okay.
That's
I didn't
right.
hear him decline being the vice chair right now.
So if I accept with not accepting the chair, what happens when you're done, Rick?
We'll have to figure that out at the time.
New elections.
And hopefully we've got some more people on by then. So we have some other potential folks willing to be chair.
Yeah. I mean, I just joined the board of Mount A this week, so my workload picked up, and that's why I didn't want to become chair, but I'd be willing to be vice chair until Rick is done, I guess. Okay.
Okay. So do we need to vote, Stu, or is he in?
I don't know. Do you want to vote anyway, just to make sure?
Let's vote. Let's vote. Yep. I vote yes.
Okay, all in favor of electing Ray as vice chair.
Make a note that it was under direction of Chair Barth. This occurred.
Okay, well, I think we've at least got a majority. I didn't see you raise your hand, Ray.
I didn't know I could vote for myself.
Oh, of course you can. Okay, anyway, we're done with that. Commissioner recruitment, I think Tanya has largely given us an update on that. And so I will be contacting the mayor requesting that she move forward with approving that application. Okay, formal planning, Ray?
Okay, I know we're behind in time here, so Tanya mentioned the council meeting next week on the wastewater collection. I wanted to make people aware that there's going to be 2 meetings in November. One is the TSP update on the 2nd. And then there's a water treatment plant status update on 11/15. So both of those will probably give us more information on how both those plans are going to move forward. And then the only other thing I added here was underneath the comprehensive plan for the housing capacity analysis was adopted in August. And I think, Chris, you mentioned you were going to stay on top of that. I think the next discussion is the housing production strategies. And I'm not sure when the next meeting for that is, but I think that's the next step for housing.
Yes, and Brandon's, I'm on Brandon's distribution list for that, so I'll be staying informed.
Okay, great. And then again, the TAP and the stormwater were going to be approved this year, but Scott mentioned everything's not closed with that. So he figures it'll be sometime next year for those. We've already given our input to that. And that's all I had, Rick.
Okay, so I had a question about the TSP. My understanding was that the funding for doing that had been pushed off for as much as 9 months. And so I don't know, maybe Tanya, you can tell us what's going to be happening at council in the short term.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure yet. We've been focused primarily on the general fund. And so I'm not sure what that timing actually looks like at this point. I know that there was an effort to be looking for some additional funding. And I'm not sure what the timing is for that.
Okay, but there's something on a November agenda with respect to the TSP?
Let me take a look and see what's on that look ahead.
Okay.
Because I know that when we talked about it at council, there was a potential, we were looking at potential grant funding to be able to pay for that. And there was another cycle that was coming up next year, which is why it was delayed. But then there was some potential for, end of year grant monies that needed to be redistributed. So let me look and see how exactly they've got it written for the look ahead at the city.
My collection from that discussion at the city council, Tanya, was that Gary had said that he would bring it back in November. He had hoped to get some grant funding, but it was already budgeted in the city's budget to actually do the TSP this year. The consultants, the point in the process where the city council actually took it up was getting ready to go out to issue the RFP.
Right, but there's I need to take a look at the look ahead to see what exactly the conversation is, because we did postpone it looking for grant funding on Gary Milliman's recommendation that we get in line potentially for next year. So let me, while we're having this meeting, let me take a look at it and we'll circle back.
Great, thank you. Okay, so the next thing on the agenda is the CPC Council study session process. And I want to remind folks that the mayor had asked that CPC prepare 3 deliverables, is what you call it, but basically 3 items that could be brought to council. And we'll be getting into things about that later on in the meeting. So this is a general discussion about that process. So I prepared a memo, which I presume that you all had a chance to look at. And so what I'm looking for is reaction to that memo, and then any other comments that any of the commissioners would like to make about the process for bringing things to council. So I'd like to throw the floor open at this point. Anybody that wants to say something about it. Bob?
Yeah, I think it's a very nice job, Rick. I didn't have a whole lot to say about it other than to suggest that we add to it the other piece of information that should be provided to council would be some sort of assessment of impact on low-income households in Ashland. So just really focusing on the equity piece and how any adverse impact on low-income households could be addressed with the whatever it is that we're presenting to the council. So that'd be an explicit piece of it.
Thank you.
You mentioned it under B, stakeholders, but also community members is applicable, but I just thought being specific about low income would be good.
I will update it. Gary?
I had 2 comments. One was related to the issue of draft ordinances. And I'm not clear, I guess, what your intent was in excluding those specific methods of communicating policy to the council are. Certainly, ultimately, any of the initiatives that the CPC might advance would ultimately lead to some sort of an ordinance adoption, or at least I presume that would be the case, unless it was a programmatic issue that staff could implement without any formal change or ordinance enforcement or structure. So I'm just curious what you had in mind there.
Sure.
And go ahead.
Happy to respond to that. And then I'll come back to you. There's a couple of issues. One is that CPC is going to be addressing items that are potentially very controversial and are possibly getting the city in legal jeopardy. And it is felt that having draft ordinances out there makes those things more difficult. The other reason that I suggest not going forward in that direction is that the format of ordinances is, I think, not the easiest to understand by both council and the public at large. And that there's a lot of background information that's more along the lines of the way that staff produces background memos. And I think it would be more appropriate for first bringing something to council. So those are the primary two reasons why I made that recommendation.
So it really is about the format of our recommendation, not about the scope. You aren't saying, as I understand it, that we won't advance recommendations that might result in the adoption or consideration of adoption by the council of specific ordinances, especially related that to the city's municipal code.
Correct.
Am I understanding you correctly?
Yes.
Okay.
I fully expect that many or all of the policy recommendations, well, not all, because some of them will just result in staff direction, but others will require ordinances. And I expect that there will be ordinances that result from CPC policy recommendations. So I absolutely do not exclude that ultimate outcome. The notion is that it's probably not the best first step. And another third reason that wasn't primary in my thinking is that I've seen this sort of thing come forward before, and it makes it difficult for the standard city processes where basically the city attorney is responsible for developing the ordinances. It just complicates that whole process. Tanya?
Yeah, I would just like to add to that. Ordinance review and approval becomes very quickly a legal process. And we don't want to confuse that for the council. When an ordinance comes forward in ordinance language, it's because the staff, the city attorney has put it together, and we have it, and that kicks off a first reading process and all of that. I think it's far better to approach council with the list of what you think the ordinance should do. And then council, if it wants that ordinance developed, will direct staff to work with that list and work with the commission to develop it. Otherwise, there isn't direction to the staff, to the city attorney to develop that, right? So I think it is right to take it forward with the ideas and the concepts, have that conversation, and then if council is interested in that ordinance, it will direct staff to go ahead and draft it, and then it'll come back for first and second reading and all of that in its formal process. But you don't want to confuse it.
Gary?
The second part of my observations are related to item number 4. Should each study session focus on one policy? I guess I believe that the council has sufficient knowledge, background, and breadth to address one or more, 3 maybe, different items in a single study session. I think the number is really as a function of what we're ready to move forward with. We have, relatively speaking, so few opportunities to engage with the council that, in my estimation, we need to ensure that we're maximizing those opportunities. The last real chance that we had to discuss a policy level issue with the council was more than a year ago, when we advanced the idea of declaring a climate emergency. So I think it is by all means prudent and essential for the commission to advance whatever and how many issues at a single time is a function not of number, but rather complexity.
Either Stu or Tanya, do you want to respond to that?
Sure. I think one of the things to keep in mind is that those study sessions are an hour and a half, and they include public testimony of up to 15 minutes and a review of the look ahead. And so it really does take us down to about an hour. And so if there is an issue that is complex enough or potentially controversial enough that it needs that deep dive by the council, it seems that it's, generally going to be one issue per study session. Now, if there are a couple of minor issues, or smaller steps that this commission wants the council to take that are lining up that aren't as complex, then you might consider that. But what you're going to want to do is, I think it's good to remember that counselors are generalists, and on any given evening, we have to suddenly become expert in a variety of different things. And so having enough time to answer questions, to have a real discussion, and to dig deep, especially into anything that where there are real questions around whether this is the right way forward, I think it's more important to make sure that you get those conversations had well than that you get a number of different things on the agenda. But again, it really depends on what's ready when.
Right. Exactly.
Ray?
Yeah, Rick, I had a question on number 5. What information should be provided to council? I'm kind of thinking of the topic of the path of natural gas. Is there such things as study sessions where you're really there to educate the council about what our policy decision is and why we made that? And because that's something that I see we wouldn't have all the answers to what you've outlined there if it's more of an education, or what our plan is, showing a plan on how we could get off gas.
Well, maybe Tanya wants to respond to that. My understanding is that, yes, there are study sessions that are informational and educational, but I'm hardly the authority on that.
Well, they are. I mean, the one thing about study sessions is that they are limited in the decisions that the council can make. So essentially the motions that are allowed at a study session are to direct staff to go forward down some particular pathway. But at study sessions, we actually can't make substantive decisions. Those are all reserved for the business meetings. And so study sessions really they're less formal. They're really not heading towards that definitive answer. And so it really is a time. You'll see, if you look on the look ahead, you'll see what gets put into the study sessions versus what gets put into the business meetings. And the study sessions are really designed for us to do a deeper dive and to have the time to ask the questions around something that is going to come back to us for a definitive decision later on. But it's often that staff is looking for guidance. And do we want them to invest time in a particular path, given whatever it is we learn at that particular study session? So there is some purpose to that, but that's really where we put those deep dive educational pieces.
So when I prepared that list, I was trying to be exhaustive of the type of questions that might be in a counselor's mind, rather than being a definitive list where all the answers need to be known ahead of time.
I think it's a good list, and we should try to address as many as we can. But obviously, when you're bringing a complex, longer-term problem forward, we won't have it all at once. But at some point, it will need to be addressed.
Chris?
Just curious what your reference to stakeholder engagement is. Could you clarify that a little bit, or how that would occur?
Well, I can give an example. Let's take the home energy score, because it's the next thing on the agenda, and maybe we can do double duty here. the home energy score typically has the realtors as primary stakeholders. And so the notion is that somebody that's selected by this commission would be reaching out to that community and hopefully identifying a stakeholder, in this case, a realtor or a few realtors that are supportive of the concept. Or if none can be found, we would attempt to find out why they are opposed to the concept. Just again, taking this example, there have been cities in Oregon where the realtor community has been uniformly opposed to it, but after some education and some points of what has happened in the past in other places have been brought forward to them, they actually became proponents of it. So that's the type of thing that I mean for stakeholder engagement.
So not counselors in any sense of that, or nothing that would signify ex parte contact or outside of standard council operation.
That was not my intent. But that actually opens an interesting question that's probably not on that list, is what we do about reaching out to individual counselors. I don't actually know what the protocol is for that. So
I'm curious too, because I was just interpreting that as in some situations they could be one and the same, right? A counselor could be a stakeholder as well, and how that.
Clearly. So if Stu or Tanya could give us some guidance on reaching out to individual counselors, that would probably be helpful at this point.
Yeah, I think we should probably check and make sure we're aware of any guardrails that might exist with the public meetings laws and whatnot. But I think it's possible to get there and have that conversation happen. Yeah. Tanya, anything to add?
I don't think so. I don't see a problem with, you know, the issue around public meetings laws is us talking to each other. Or you know, us having somebody else do you know, having one of us do kind of a serial conversation or a set of serial conversations. But as is the case with public testimony and anything else, the public is fully able to talk to all of us, and advisory boards are fully able to have conversations with each of us. So I don't see an issue there.
And Tanya, in turn, we could do the same with counselors. Is that correct? Yep.
Yes. Yeah. So you can, on any of these issues that are coming before council, when something is on the calendar, it's perfectly appropriate to ask to meet with them, or, you know, to talk about the issue, to answer their questions, all that sort of thing.
I think there's, you know, folks on commissions or council should declare a conflict of interest if one exists. So hopefully that's, if there is a stakeholder counselor, that should be workable.
Okay, Gary, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just, it seems like I understand C, because, you know, that suggests the community and stakeholders within the community. D, in contrast, I'm not sure whether, if I substitute city council as the stakeholder in that phrase, certainly the city is in a position to adopt the ordinance requirements, but maybe your intent there was to, are the stakeholders in a position where it is possible for them to comply with the ordinance requirements? I'm not, just seems like those two don't quite jibe.
Yeah, no, I think I should reword that because you're speaking to it, it was more the intent. So if there's no other comments, I'd like to come back to number 4, because Gary raised an issue about whether we should be doing more than one thing. And my understanding from the discussion is that it's context dependent, and that there's going to have to be a judgment call when we're actually bringing something forward. And so there isn't really a definitive answer tonight, other than we're going to figure it out on a case-by-case basis. Is that fair?
Works.
Okay. Okay, so I also want to comment on the proposed council study session schedule. You will see that some of the material, which was in an ordinance form, was not brought forward tonight. And so we don't have as many policy options to consider tonight as I had thought at the time that I was creating this memo. And so we'll just have to see how this goes. It may be that will entail some delay at getting to the end point, depending upon whether we decide we want to bring one of those topics forward as the first thing or not. So with that, if there's nothing else about this generic discussion, I'd like to move on to the specific discussions, starting with the home energy score. Seeing no objection. Clean buildings, home energy score, Stu.
Okay. So I hope everybody had a chance to read the document, because I'm certainly not going to go through every bit of it tonight. But I'll say, just by way of recap, and for the folks watching the meeting, the home energy score was created by the U.S. Department of Energy as a simple and credible tool for evaluating primarily single-family homes. And what that means is that you can get a score for your house that's from 1 to 10. And it's basically like miles per gallon for a house. So when you buy a car, you see that it's 20 miles per gallon or 50 miles per gallon. When you buy a house, you have no information about that. So this program would attempt to set a baseline for that information. Fortunately for us, several other Oregon cities have already done this. The proposal here is essentially a copy of Milwaukee's operation. They're about the same size as us, so it made sense to do that. Let's see, the Oregon Department of Energy is also advocating for cities to adopt this standard. And this is also something that could dovetail, in theory, with the home energy loan, if that comes to fruition, which I didn't give an update on that, but they haven't looked at any of those applications yet. But now that the federal fiscal year is over, they will start doing so, or next month they will. So the home energy score is pretty versatile. It really allows consumers to compare, two properties. There's a lot of reasons to like it. It's beneficial for equity purposes, to help stabilize energy bills, to help provide consumer protection and transparency in the marketplace. It's, like I said, it's pretty easy to understand, and it's also a standard format. So you can know that if you have one assessor come to your home and then you have another assessor come to your home, in theory, they should come up with the exact same number. Let's see. It enables home buyers or home shoppers to shop based on efficiency. That's something that you can't do very easily right now. Look up homes that have like a really high efficiency rating. You kind of have to take the builder's word for it or the homeowner's word for it, or do your own research. So we could really enable people to shop for the best, most efficient kinds of homes if we can empower them with that information. And then the nice thing, Portland started doing this. Their policy was developed over 5 years ago. So there's multiple years of this program being implemented in Portland. Milwaukee and Hillsborough also have programs that they're actually working right now. There's about 3 or 4 other cities that are also considering a similar program. So this comes directly out of the SEEP, Buildings and Energy Action 2-2, says require building energy scores to identify and incentivize cost-effective energy efficiency improvements. So this is right up the SEEP's alley. From my perspective, this is one of the most impactful, lowest cost things we could do as a city. It does create a mandate under the proposal that I put together. The consensus really is that voluntary programs don't work. So folks at the state and city level are really advocating for a uniform requirement. Why don't I pause and see if anybody has questions? Well, one of the last thing I would say is that any home can that is eligible for the process can request a score, can get a score, but this program would only require homes that are being listed for sale to get a score. So it's not everybody all at once. It's only folks who are getting ready to sell. And the cost of a score is about $125. I'll say that, gosh, what was I going to say? We don't have, one of the biggest barriers to this program happening in Southern Oregon is that we don't have a population of state certified home energy assessors that are in the valley here. But I have it on pretty good authority from Earth Advantage and the other cities and Oregon Department of Energy that once this type of requirement is in place, that the contractors are pretty willing to get certified to do this. It's an extra service they can sell, and it does not require a lot of additional training for most contractors. So I guess I'll stop there and see if anybody has questions. Bob.
Yeah, thanks, Stu. Really nice job putting this together. Just one other piece of information that we had heard when we were talking with the folks from, I guess, DEQ and Earth Advantage is the number of years of validity of the home energy score. I think if I recall correctly, it was valid for five years. Is that right? So that might be something. So in other words, if somebody gets a home energy assessment done, they don't have to get another one done in order to list their home for sale if they do that within 5 years.
Yeah, I think that sounds right to me. I'd have to double check if it's actually 5 or another number, but yeah, right. It does hold for a while. Folks, one of the cool things about this score is that it gives the homeowner a prioritized list of energy improvements that they can make. So a lot of folks will go and do those. And then some people will get another score, particularly folks who want to list their home with the higher score. So, you know, there's also a piece on the report, the home energy report, that says, if you do all this stuff, your home could theoretically move from a 4 to a 7, say. So it's pretty valuable information. Yeah, so, and I will have to check, Bob, I can see how long that score lasts for.
Okay. The other piece that I just think of maybe a finer point in the background materials, which I think were, as I said, really nicely done, is that in terms of housing affordability, it does actually, you know, it does point to the possibility of reducing operating costs of the home. So emphasizing that a little bit more, maybe even a special section that talks about housing affordability in this context. Then the third thing is we talked at some point. We know that the City of Ashland does offer home energy assessments. They're not technically home energy scores, and I wonder if it would be possible to look into seeing whether the City of Ashland's home energy assessor, I don't know what you'd call him, consultant, whether he could be certified to be a home energy score provider, and that might actually give us a little bit more flexibility as a city.
Yeah, that's a conversation I definitely want to have once we get some direction that this sounds good. One of the things to consider is how do you want to implement home energy scores for low and moderate income housing or folks who are on energy assistance. And so one possibility is to issue a voucher, and another possibility is that we have a city staff person who can provide that. So we can definitely look at that a little more.
Nice.
Any other questions, Ray?
Yeah, Stu, I've seen some energy scores where they give recommendations on what to fix. Will that be included in this?
Yeah, it does give you a list of potential upgrades you can make.
Okay. And will there be say I'm thinking in terms of electrification. Will there be any preference for that, or does it just say, you know, you can get a more efficient heating unit? Wouldn't necessarily recommend a heat pump over a gas furnace, or what?
Yeah, I think it does. I'd have to double check and see, but there is a carbon footprint aspect of the report. At the end of the document I put together, there's a whole page of links. And if you go to the state page or any of the other cities, you can see an example energy report. And I may have even linked it directly on there. I don't recall. But yeah, it's a multi-page report. It addresses carbon footprint, prioritized upgrades for the home, what your score change could potentially be. And it's also, you know, from a functional perspective, it's a nice catalog of what is happening in our housing inventory. So we can, in theory, mine that for data and have a better sense of really what people are using out in the field.
Okay, great. That's what I wanted to know, is that it will talk about carbon footprint. So that's excellent. And I think you did a really great job on this.
Thanks. Tanya, and then Gary.
Yes. So I saw that the detached accessory residential units are not covered by the program. And yet I know that that's where, you know, we have a lot of them, and we are probably going to just keep getting more of them. And a lot of them are smaller units, which is probably where I'm assuming that that's where a number of our low income people are living. So is there any possibility of including those in some fashion?
Yeah, so I found out about this. Actually, it's a great question. You can run an ADU through this process, but it needs to have a separate address enabled in order to keep the information separate. So it's kind of a database structure issue, I think, but it's not a problem with compatibility with the model so much as it is, it makes it too complicated for the MLS to deal with.
So if it's 695.5, you're good.
That's what I've heard. Yeah, that was what I gathered from the folks at the state and at Earth Advantage.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Gary.
Hey, so given that a number of cities have had this program in place over the last several years, has there been any evidence or how much impact on emissions does this program have in isolation from other things? Has it actually resulted in energy improvements that have led to carbon or greenhouse gas emission reductions?
Yeah, I would have to look. Portland did a really comprehensive report back. I think it was a 30-month report on their program, and they addressed some of that information. I can tell you that qualitatively, it's definitely helped. You know, at the most basic level, it's created a tool that lets people shop for more efficient homes. So I think it's definitely, and it also gives people a very streamlined education on what they can do to be more efficient. So I would say it's definitely had an impact, especially because it's required for all homes that are sold. And at this point, you know, thousands and thousands of homes have gone through the program up north. So I'd have to look and dig into it and see exactly if they have like a metric tons of carbon saved because of this program. It's probably a little hard to say, but maybe someone's come up with an estimate.
I'd be real curious to know, because clearly it serves a very important consumer information purpose. The question in some ways is, has it translated into emissions reductions?
Yeah.
And I certainly hope that it would, but education doesn't necessarily always do that.
Yeah. Well, and it's definitely motivated some folks that have a lower scoring house to do some work on it before they sell. So I would say in that way, it's pretty obvious that it's had an effect. But I'll connect, you know, we talked about maybe next meeting having Earth Advantage and or Oregon Department of Energy come. So they would be able to speak more expansively about what's happening up north and what's happening across the state. So we'll try to get them at the next meeting for maybe 15 or 20 minutes.
Thanks.
Yeah. Bob?
Yeah, just for Gary, on Gary's question, the Austin study that Stu included in the packet, although the link doesn't work, I meant to tell you that, Stu. You can go and Google it and get the link, and I did that. And it doesn't talk about the question of greenhouse gas emissions, but it does talk about pretty rigorous economic analysis, looking at the impact of the Austin program on energy efficiency investment in energy efficiency equipment, comparing to a group and a control group in a nice natural experiment. So one could assume that there could be some from there some greenhouse gas emissions impacts as well, but it doesn't talk about greenhouse gas emissions specifically.
So I'm happy to take more questions. I think my time is almost up, but I guess there's a question about what do we want to do next, which I think we said we'll try to bring the other folks in. I can polish this document a bit more. I'd love to have input from you folks if you have any more. And we'll just bring it back next time. Does that sound good?
Yes, well, in the larger context, the intent was to go through more policy recommendations and then prioritize. My personal feeling is that this fits well as a first thing to bring to council because it's doesn't cost the city anything. Compared to, say, eliminating natural gas, it's much less complex and controversial. And so that's my feeling about where it sits in things right now. But I don't want to have the full discussion of whether it's the first thing we try to take to council until after we've had a chance to go through the other policy recommendations.
But people would like to see this at the next meeting for further discussion? Or is that what you're saying we should decide on, Rick?
Yes, I expect that there's going to be enough time to continue refining this regardless of whether it's the first thing to go to council or not.
Sure. Okay, great.
So
in the meantime,
go
ahead.
There were a couple of questions and suggested next steps about reaching out to local real estate professionals. Are you, Rick, suggesting that we not proceed with that step until a further discussion of this at the next meeting?
No, I'm not suggesting that we slow this down at all.
Okay, got it.
The only question is whether it's the first thing to go to council.
Yep, got it.
Okay, thank you, Stu. The next item is the path off fossil gas. The first sub-item there is a potential motion. Is there anybody that wants to actually make that motion?
I'll make the motion. I'm following your text here. Should the CPC make this policy recommendation? So my motion is that, consistent with its charge and consistent with the adopted Climate and Energy Action Plan, the Climate Policy Commission recommends the City of Ashland develop a specific timeline in which new fossil gas infrastructure shall cease to be built, including new service connections. And CPC further recommends that all existing gas equipment and appliances be electrified as they reach the end of their service life.
There's been a motion. Is there a second? Okay. Well, it's going to die for lack of a second.
Well, we can still have discussion, can't we?
Not in terms of a motion.
I'll second it for purposes of discussion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Do you want to speak to your motion, Ray?
Yeah, I think this is something Rick and I have discussed in detail. And the reason, because it's consistent with our SEEP and it's consistent where we need to go. I know there's ongoing discussions with the gas utilities, and they're putting forth a lot of future plans, which at this point is very debatable whether they'll be able to achieve them. But I think what we're saying here is this is a policy from the CPC. It doesn't say that yet. We don't have a timeline for when the city should adopt it. There's a lot of work to do here. There's a lot of education needed, both to the council and to the community. So this motion here, I think, is very specific just in terms of it's a recommendation from the CPC relative to the future of natural gas.
Okay, any further discussion? Gary?
I think from what you said, Ray, is absolutely correct, that this is the direction that we believe, I think collectively, the city needs to go. I don't know, I believe there would not be any debate. The issue is, in my mind, whether it's timely for the commission to adopt this policy. And in my estimation, it more appropriately needs to be embodied within the next agenda item, which is the outline for Ashland's path off fossil gas, which we'll talk about in a minute. But that's it. It's really, this motion is really in some ways about stepping up our planning efforts to achieve some outcomes that we see as necessary, which in some ways is the CEAP forum in a way. That's where this initiative should be placed. And given that we'll be updating the CEAP in the next biennium, or at least we hope to, it seems like that's the time that we need to bring this kind of policy forward so that the community has an opportunity to engage with us in discussions about the merits of this policy or others that affect the use of natural gas in the city.
So are you saying it's more of a timing issue when the CPC should adopt this as a policy recommendation?
No, it's really a matter of the when and where both. This seems like a very appropriate thing to be included in the CEAP so that we've got specific, we're providing as a part of the CEAP direction, action, timelines, and outcomes. And that level of detail is what I think is needed for us to be able to credibly move forward with this kind of policy. Certainly, we wouldn't expect the city council to, well, or at least I should say, I wouldn't expect the city council to embrace this policy at this time, given what we know about the regulatory environment in which natural gas is currently operated.
Yeah, that's why we didn't put a specific date in here, because there's a lot of unknowns still. It's really just a statement of policy of where we're headed. Yeah, Tanya?
Yeah, I think that's actually the question that I have for you, Ray, which is, you know, what do you see as sort of the purpose of this statement and passing it as a statement?
I think it had to do with our communication with Avista originally. That should Avista know what our policy recommendation is. And that we couldn't make this as part of our communication unless it had actually passed.
As a policy recommendation to council, but it's not a policy, it's not a sort of stated policy of council, right? I mean, no. Are you, right, no, but would this go to council?
Eventually, which I think is, I mean, it would have to, right?
Well, that's my question, because when it comes to the council, I don't see the council accepting this recommendation because it doesn't have the details of how, right? So that I think is going to actually keep it from being accepted and might actually open, you know, in that same way that we don't want to get the sort of fear of what this might look like to get out ahead of us. I think we run into that potential problem here.
I think that's it's a good discussion. There is sort of a gray area we're trying to explore, aren't we, Rick? In terms of what the CPC says and what the council says?
Well, I don't think there's anything gray about that. This is just what CPC would be saying. It's not a official policy statement by the city.
That's right. But I think Tanya's saying, can the CPC even say this without council approval?
Oh, this is our recommendation? No, I don't see any block to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could tell Avista that this is your recommendation, but it's not really a recommendation unless you recommend it to council, right? And so it's not a recommendation if we just pass it here and it sits here. If we want it to be a recommendation, then it needs to then move on to the council so they know about it. And my concern is that without detail to it,
I don't think it
becomes a problem. Yeah, that's where my concern would be. And you know, the thing about, you know, when Rick came in front of the council, the work plan includes this conversation about natural gas. And so the council on some level, you know, does understand that this is in the work plan and this commission is working on this. And so maybe for your purposes, in terms of talking with Avista, you know, maybe that is something that could be referenced instead, that it is in fact in our work plan.
Yes, that would come up in the letter, and there was that'll be after this, and there's some discussion of whether that needs to be removed, right? Mm-hmm. Or,
well, I'm just saying, I don't know whether it makes sense. Yeah, and I don't know whether it makes sense to put that in the letter or not, but I think that it in my mind, it makes it to where having a formal recommendation is not necessary.
Okay. I think this is good discussion. I think we know where we want to go, and the question is, how do we get there? In some ways, maybe it would have made more sense to look at the path first before we had this, but you know, either way, that's fine. Good discussion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. We're still discussing, so eventually we need to come to a vote unless you want to withdraw your motion.
I think I'll withdraw my motion at this time. There seems to be not much support and a lot more discussion to take place.
Okay. Well, then let's move on to the next item, which is the outline for actions path off fossil gas, Ray.
Okay, so obviously I'm trying to pick up some big shoes that Jeff left. And one of the things we're looking for here, I was thinking, you know, what are the things we would want to educate the community and council and ourselves about in terms of how would we get there? And then at the end, you know, I listed 5 possible paths. Maybe there's more in terms of what we could do. And part of this is also looking at what other cities have done as well. And each path obviously would have a different timeline for how long we could reduce emissions from fossil gas. So, I mean, the beginning of it was really, I was thinking more of a study session with council in terms of education, in terms of what the emissions are, where do we use it in Ashland. Yeah, I think one of the important things was what's the cost of going electric versus fossil gas, especially in terms of equity situations. And then what effects might state plans have, the EO 20-4 or the climate protection plan? You know, are we going to see some benefit from that we may not have to take at the local level? Or what additional things would we have to do? And then there's the question of suppose future of fossil gas, what happens if more people go off it? What's going to happen to rates? And then there's the big question that the gas utilities put forward in terms of RNG or hydrogen as a viable solution. How much what's the data behind that, and how much is that really a viable future, or is it really just targeted future customers that should be using those, and really everybody else should get off for residents the use of fossil gas. So it was just sort of an initial draft. I welcome any other inputs people have or any further discussion. Yeah, Gary.
I really like what you've done. It seems that if we could somehow manage to address all these items over the next year, this would certainly provide a excellent inclusion in the SEEP update. It would then serve a multitude of purposes. One, we would be able to provide that information to the general public in the context of all the many other things that the city's doing in terms of climate impact and resiliency actions, and also give us direction for what comes next in terms of our priorities as a commission. But again, my kind of vision of how this would be used would be as a part of a SEEP update. Is that anything similar to how you saw it being used, Ray?
Well, I think the SEEP already says we need to get to cleaner fuels and reduce emissions. So I don't see how this, I'm not sure you need to include this kind of detail in a SEEP. I don't know if Stu, you have any thoughts on that, or Tanya?
I think it's good to include a pretty wide swath of background information every time we redo the SEEP, because it'll be necessary for people to reorient. A lot's changed since 2016 when that plan was put together. So yeah, I think it's worth including. But
so
also,
there could be some actions you're saying that would come out of this that could be included in terms of the strategies in the SEEP.
Yeah, potentially.
Yeah, I'm okay with that part. I thought maybe, Gary, you were saying it's sort of, we need to update the SEEP to be able to do this. You know?
Well, truthfully, I was advocating that we update the SEEP this year, right? So I'm anxious to see us do that, because in some respects, I think the SEEP lacks the kind of detail that you're describing in this document that provides a pathway for us actually to achieve the goals established in the SEEP. In many instances, the SEEP is just simply too vague and provides too little direction, and we need to remedy that in the next update.
Okay.
And this kind of detail would go a long ways to providing that direction.
But we'd still have to create the detail first. Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, and I agree, Gary, that that's where it eventually needs to go. This is unlike the previous topic, the home energy score topic, probably the most difficult topic that I expect this commission to take up in the near future. And so I am hoping that we're going to fill in an outline like Ray has prepared and schedule a study session with council and start the council education process. Simultaneously with that, I think there needs to be stakeholder engagement, and we're starting to do that by reaching out to Avista, but there also needs to be outreach to the community at large, because it's so impactful and so big and complicated. Although I agree it does need to go into an updated SEEP, I don't think that's the next step.
Clearly, we aren't going to update the SEEP for roughly 2 years in any event, under the best of circumstances.
I think Tanya has her hand up.
Yeah, so you know, the way I think it's it's always a little tricky when you're developing a plan, because there's always the question of to what level of detail do you take it? And especially when at the point of developing the plan, you're not sure of the pathway. And so when I look at the SEEP, I see broad discretion in terms of how to move some of this forward. Where the rubber meets the road really is what is acceptable in this community and with this council. Anything that we want to do to move the SEEP goals forward that is acceptable to the community and to the council is fair game in the way I read it. So in some places of the SEEP, we do have a much more detailed approach that is, we can point directly to it. And in other places, what we would say is, this is the pathway we see as the best pathway to meet this particular goal that's more vague in the SEEP. And so I don't see, while it's great to include it later, I agree with Rick that there's no reason to not move on this now. I think we have the discretion to bring this forward. I think the bigger question is what's the best way so that it's a conversation in the community, and we have that open discussion so that we don't have a fear-based response that we then have to try to overcome before we have any concept of what the timeline looks like for this, what order it would go in, what the pieces would be. And so to me, I think we should get started on this work. And then when the SEEP update happens, we'll know what to put in the SEEP update. But to me, I really appreciate the work that you've done here, Ray, because when I look at that last set of bullets, those are actionable pieces, right? That we can start having conversations about. We can start figuring out the stakeholder engagement. The incentive programs, all of those pieces are part of this. And we're doing some of them already. So I think I would like to see us get started on trying to figure out exactly what is that stakeholder engagement. How do we do it? And maybe that's one of the things where we can learn from some of the folks who have put these in place in other areas. I'm sure they have learned valuable lessons. And I think, Ray, you've been in touch with those folks, at least several of the folks on this commission, I think, have been in touch with them. So that's where I would like to focus our energy. It's making a detailed plan and starting to move it.
I think, Bob.
Yeah, actually, Tanya said beautifully everything that I was hoping to say. I would echo that we don't need to wait until, I don't think we have to wait till update the SEEP. I see this as a really nice thin list, really, not very detailed. And now is the task before us is to figure out how we fill out the detail and start working on it, and how we organize as a commission to do that, and who else in the community we could be allies for doing that as well. So yeah, I would be horrified if we thought we had to wait until we update the SEEP to actually start moving on some of these things. And we've got plenty of support within the existing SEEP to move on this, and it's in the work plan. So it's now a matter of how we do it.
Okay, any other discussion then? So I'm hearing we want to move forward with this, and we'll have to discuss how we're going to do that.
Yeah, do you have a particular next micro step for this, Ray?
I think one of the things it was put together originally with the thought that we would have a study session with council. And so maybe what we need is, how much detail does that need to be so that they understand what we're thinking in terms of what we think a path off is, and get their feedback. So the question is how much information do we need for that?
Well, I personally think I have enough grasp of the subject to have an hour conversation with council about how this all goes. So I'd be happy to work with you to start putting together such a presentation, and then we can just see when it makes sense to try to schedule that discussion with council. Does that make sense to everybody else?
Yeah, I think it does. We know this is a long, it's going to take time and a lot of work, but I think it's good for us in giving this presentation that the community knows what we're working on and where we're headed. Yeah, Tanya.
And I would just add that I think that the concept of design specs might be useful in this proposal, since we would be going back before council without real details about what this looks like. And so sometimes it can be helpful to say, we're going to undertake a process that looks like this, whatever we decide that process is going to look like, to make sure that the process we put in place addresses the concerns of the business community, right? What are the things we think are going to be the concerns at the council that, that addresses the issues that low-income people are, might have with all of this, so that what our goals are in figuring out the best way forward that will then be brought back to council, right? So I think that might be one of the ways to get that conversation started, and to get it started in a way that that creates confidence that there's going to be a really solid community-based process for figuring out the details.
And we may need help from other commissions like the CCOC.
Right, exactly. And if we do need that from other commissions, I think it makes sense to have those conversations with those commissions, so that when the council looks at what the process is, the Climate Policy Commission can say, we have already had this discussion with the leads of these commissions, and they've agreed to help us with this process. We know that we need to move to be diligent and conscientious in developing this process, because we know it's a major initiative in this community. And so here's what the plan is for developing the details of this process. But I think that's, the more details you've got on the process and what your outcomes, your goals are that you're working towards in here, I think that's the conversation to have with the council at this point. Because it could very quickly get into a detailed conversation that we're not prepared to answer at this point, because we're not far enough along in the process, and we don't want to get bogged down in the how are you going to do this versus how are you going to undertake a process in the community to come back to us with a good way forward. Does that sound right to you, Stu?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I would hope we would offer at least some potential pathways or a glimpse into what other cities have been doing also.
Yes.
But I think that'll go along with the background material. We have to make the case for why to do this. It's in the SEEP already, sort of. But we'll need to remind everyone, why is this important? What does the process look like? And what might come out at the other end.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think I saw head nods when I proposed that Ray and I start putting something together, and we'll bring it back whenever we have something, unless there's an objection to that. I think that's enough on the outline for tonight. So thank you, Ray. There's a couple of items that were brought forward to the commission regarding Avista. At the last CPC meeting, we had anticipated that Avista was going to be making a presentation tonight, and they chose not to do that. And so even though this commission had approved generation of a question list, two things have happened. One is I wanted to bring forward a communication that's responding to the previous presentation, and this commission had not approved doing that. And since we had the time available to bring the question list back, I wanted to have the commission have a chance to respond to the question list. So these are in the order of communication and questions. Stu rightfully broke up what was one document into two because they are really two separate concepts. And so I think for the discussion purpose, I don't really care if we flip back and forth between these two agenda items. But in the end, I'd like to know whether the commission approves sending either or both of these. Bob?
I guess I'm a little puzzled by, since there's no, I mean, I understood and I agreed with the need to send a set of questions to the Avista representative before we had our session with him. And I think that would be useful. Absent that, and since there's no date, you know, even scheduled on the horizon for that, I guess I wonder whether, why would we need to do this at this point? And that's with respect to the questions. And with respect to the letter, I guess I've never really seen a reason to send that exactly. So I question what we would achieve by sending either or both of these to Avista at this time.
Well, there's a short-term answer to that, which is Avista. Stu, correct me if I'm wrong, because you were the one that actually communicated with Steve. They canceled because they are awaiting some decisions from the PUC. And they're expecting for that to resolve by the end of the year. And you'll also see that at least one of the questions is addressing those specific schedule issues. What is it specifically they're waiting on? And I personally would like to know that, so that I can go look at the case that's filed in front of the PUC and hope to understand more how the situation might evolve. The other reason to be sending, particularly the communication responding to the previous presentation, is that I see, even though this might seem highly unlikely, that the best path forward for both Avista and the community of Ashland is for Avista to become a partner in dealing with the gas emissions. And there are a number of technically possible ways of doing that. And I would welcome an open conversation with them. I don't know that they do it right now, but at some point, I'm expecting that they're going to have to make a business decision about what they're going to do, because what's happening with fossil gas throughout the country is pretty overwhelming. Things are changing. They may be objecting to it and fighting against it, but I want them to know that we are open to having a rational conversation for how this is going to move forward, that is free from invective and posturing and that sort of thing. And I'd like for Ashland to actually provide some leadership in how natural gas companies and a community that has chosen not to use fossil gas anymore can move forward in a reasonable fashion. Bob?
So then maybe a follow-up question would be, as I understand it from the draft of the letter, it would have to be approved by the city council before we can transmit it. So what we'd be asking, it would be for the city council to approve this letter that would be authored or attributed to us. It wouldn't necessarily be the city council's questions. I guess I'm a little confused about what the city council would need in order to be able to consider this and authorize transmission to Avista, and whether any of this, whether the letter itself is going to answer those questions by the city council, or whether we need to actually prepare more background documents. It just doesn't, it seems to me like a rather crooked path to get forward.
Well, I think it depends upon the city council whether they are going to delegate opening these kinds of conversations to CPC or not. And so I'm interested in what the answer is to that question about whether they're going to authorize the transmittal in its own right. Because of our previous discussion with the motion, which was withdrawn, there's obviously one change that would need to be made in the letter, because we would not be able to say that that's our policy recommendation, because we've chosen not to do that. But outside of that, it's just outlining, I think, in very broad terms, but specific enough that they're technically possible, of how a rational city and a rational gas supplier can start moving forward, and that we are open to the conversations. I think that's the essence of the letter, once you eliminate the policy recommendation. Ray?
Yeah, Rick, I'm just wondering if it would be better to bring this letter to council after we have our study session.
Can you speak a little bit louder? I can't really hear you.
Yeah, sorry, we're driving. I'm just wondering if it makes more sense to send this letter.
Oh boy.
On our path off gas.
I heard him a little bit, Rick. I think that he was saying maybe it's better to send this letter after we have the study session with the council about the path off of natural gas.
Okay. That's a reasonable position to take from my point of view. So how should we proceed here? I'm hearing hesitation from several commissioners. I guess I'd like to hear somebody suggest a specific course of action. Tanya?
So one of the things I think that we've talked about a bit is just the fact that with the franchise fee agreements and those contracts in place, that this conversation goes a little bit deeper into the city's legal structure than a lot of the things that we work on. I would recommend that we at least hold it off until that conversation with the council, until we get a feel for what the council thinks about this path in general, and then we can take a look at whether strategically it makes sense to send something like this at that point. And by then, Avista should know what's happening with their PUC, with the PUC decision, and we'd have a better context.
Okay, I'm fine with that. Stu?
Yeah, one thing I just wanted to flag, which I think would happen anyway, is I'd like to make sure these suggestions for collaboration with the utility make it into our path off fossil gas document, because I think that they, like you said, it's a real opportunity for leadership, and I don't want it to look like we're only being punitive with that path off fossil gas. So just a suggestion.
Gary, I thought I saw you pop your hand up. You muted?
Yeah, I just concur with the direction that's being discussed.
Okay. Bob?
Yes, I concur as well. I guess I would be prepared, though, to provisionally accept the list of questions that are drafted, so that if there's once there's a schedule for that meeting, that we'll be ready to go with these questions, rather than have to deputize a committee to draft some questions. We don't necessarily, I wouldn't say we need to send them to them yet, but we could certainly be ready with them in our pocket when the meeting is scheduled.
Okay, well, it's already been brought forward now, which we didn't even have in September. So I think we've already got them in our pocket. And my expectation is that we would have at least one meeting in between when Avista wants to make a presentation and when it actually occurs. So I'm not so concerned about that. Okay, so I think we formed a consensus about how we're going to move forward, but it's basically an extension of the previous sub-agenda item consensus that we formed before. And that's fine with me. So, did anybody else want to speak to the larger question of the path off fossil gas? Gary had submitted some ordinance language that, for reasons already discussed, did not make it into the packet. Gary, I wanted to give you an opportunity to say something if there was anything you wanted to bring forward.
Well, actually, I anticipate that measure being considered as among those that the CPC will consider bringing forward to the council. And so I'm hoping at least that both the carbon note and the policy context for the city to consider prohibiting further expenditures on natural gas infrastructure for its new or remodeled buildings to be discussed at next month's meeting. Obviously, the decision to no longer use natural gas in new city construction or in remodeled buildings is clearly a part of the path off natural gas. And it would probably be desirable in that context to list that separately, because my guess is that that can operate on a very different timeline than the overall issue of natural gas and the extension of that utility to private new construction. Clearly, the city has every opportunity to make the policy internal to itself to no longer use natural gas. And I'm hopeful that the council would see that as a prudent policy given the climate impacts of its use and the long-term projection for new construction to consume natural gas. If a new building is built at this juncture, it will continue to use natural gas until that fuel source is no longer available, presumably. Howsoever, if the city chooses not to use that natural gas in new construction, then we're free from that constraint and that impact. In any event, those are two issues that I think we seriously need to consider at our next meeting.
Okay, would it be fair if Ray and I were to combine those thoughts into the presentation that we already have signed up to create, or do you think, I suspect that an awful lot of the background that's necessary for council to understand what you're proposing is very similar to the general problem for the whole community?
I think, in my estimation, both those issues can move through independently of the overall strategy. I think they are salient policies that the city uniquely has control over, and there are very few external constituencies that would be impacted by those decisions. That's contrasted to the overall path off natural gas, who roughly 50% of the households in Ashland would be impacted by that course of policy action, not necessarily in the short term, but in the long term, certainly that would be the impact. And that, again, that's in contrast to two very straightforward, in my estimation, policy choices that the council can make. One is to at least evaluate the impacts of their programs and policies and capital improvements on greenhouse gas emissions. And secondly, to simply just stop providing natural gas to city buildings, that is new construction or remodels. I see those as two very simple issues for us to present.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that you think it would be worthwhile to start developing a presentation for council that focus on the city's use of natural gas.
Absolutely.
Okay, and I'd be happy to work with you on that. So is that a reasonable conclusion for tonight?
Yes, I think so. Let's see where we can take it.
Okay, Tanya?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. And I wonder, I don't think I saw that on the path off natural gas in the bulleted list. So I apologize, Ray, if that was in there. But if it's not in there, I think maybe we should think about adding that to the bulleted list.
Yes.
You know, this is how we consider getting there. And of course, we don't have to wait to get started on that. But I think it's an important piece, because as you mentioned, Gary, it really is internally to the city. It is a step that the city can take to show its commitment.
And I would just add that I think it's a powerful communication tool to the residents of the city if, in fact, the council can make the decision to no longer use natural gas in its buildings and projects, more particularly the new public works building and the pool, that sends an incredibly powerful message to the community as a whole and begins a basis for discussion of how we move off of natural gas more generally.
Okay, I'll add as one of the first steps as an option.
Great. Stu?
Just make sure to pull me into that conversation, please, because I have some stuff to add when we get to it.
Yep. Okay. We are starting to run out of time, so I'd like to wind down the path off fossil gas discussion and move on to the nuclear-free zone ordinance memo. I want to give a little bit of background to that memo. Well, the bulk of the background is here. I took it upon myself to write this memo. And so what's before the commission tonight is whether you feel like I hit the mark or not. And if you don't think so, what we should do in order to modify what was written. If you feel like it does hit the mark and the commission is okay with sending it off to council, then that would be another possible outcome. So now, is there any discussion for this?
Do you need approval? Do you need a motion of approval?
I would like one. That's my preferred outcome.
I move the chair be authorized to execute and forward the letter as included in the packet to the city council.
Is there a second? Ray, are you?
Yeah, I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion?
Yeah, Rick, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay. One of the things I was wondering is if we should go any further, and given that we already use the existing nuclear power from the Bonneville distribution, should we make a statement that we should continue to use that while it's operational, being a greenhouse gas free emissions already built?
Yeah, you're starting to break up. Sorry?
Maybe this has to do really with our discussions with Bonneville in the future.
I'd be fine to make that point. Although, as Stu points out, we don't actually have any control over what DPA does in order to source the electricity that we buy. But nonetheless, I think the concept that from a climate change point of view, nuclear is preferred to the fossil fueled plants is something that I'd be happy to say.
Okay, thanks.
Is there anybody that objects to adding that sort of verbiage? Gary? You're muted.
Sorry. I did a little bit of internet research, and there have been some analyses of the total footprint of nuclear power plants. And as I recall, it is in part determined by the quality of the nuclear fuel itself and the level of processing, as I recall, that's required to produce the actual fuel. So I haven't researched it enough to reach the conclusion that nuclear fuel or nuclear powered plants are in fact superior in any way. So unless there's other
I
information.
Get that. The memo doesn't try to, it states that might be an issue, but it doesn't come to any resolution on it. And my personal feeling is that's not a very good use of commission bandwidth to deal with that. Bob?
Yeah, Rick, I agree with you. The general and specific thrust and conclusions of your memo. I was struck by the sentence that says CPC did not examine greenhouse gas emissions associated with reactor construction and operation. That seems to me an important point. And also I would just add, and decommissioning, because that's also one of the big issues with nuclear power plants. But with that, if you would want to add that sort of thing, I'd be happy to go forward.
Good point.
Okay, so Ray, what I'm hearing is that there's not universal agreement to make the modification you were proposing. Are you okay with leaving it the way it is with respect to that issue?
If we don't have agreement on that, I am okay.
Okay. And so the only thing I've heard is Bob proposing that decommissioning be added to the list, and I'm happy to do that. And so if the memo is modified as Bob suggested, I think it would modify Gary's motion. And so I'd like to bring it to a vote. Or all in favor of the motion as modified, please raise your hand. Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you. Let's see. No, the CPC look ahead. We have almost 20 minutes. I think the near-term work of the commission we've discussed quite a bit tonight. My understanding is that there will be 3 different presentations that we hope to bring to council fairly soon. There is the home energy score. There is the city setting an example of getting off of fossil gas. And then there's the general background for how the community might get off of fossil gas. I don't know that we need to make a decision about which one's going to be first tonight. It seems like if we're going to move forward creating all those presentations, we should just do so and bring them back to the next meeting. Gary?
I believe you intended to include the carbon note in that list? Or,
I did. I'm sorry.
Okay.
For unfortunate reasons, it's not right in front of me right at the moment. Right. So there's those 4 things. that my understanding right now is that we have enough bandwidth to pursue all four of those things simultaneously. Is that a fair assumption?
I think so. You know, the basics are drafted. You know, there's already been work done. So I think what you're talking about is getting it to the point where it's ready for council. So it seems to me that it's really a question about timing, and knowing and seeing what is on the council's agendas and study session for both study sessions and business meetings. You know, we're probably looking at January, which lines up, Rick, with the conversation that we've been having with the city manager pro tem, Gary Milliman. So, you know, we're looking at early next year. And then the question is, you know, what is the cadence?
Right. And what I'm hearing so far is that the four items that I just listed can be refined simultaneously, that we don't need to make a choice between them at this point. And so my hope would be that we would have something to review at the next meeting for each of them. And we'll just see how it all goes. You know, depends on what I receive as chair when I'm working with Stu on forming the next agenda, and that we can just leave it at that. We don't need to make that choice. And if that's the case, the short-term progress on our work plan, I think is fairly clear, because I would not propose trying to do anything more than those four things. The discussion that I wanted to have looking at the CPC look ahead has more to do with the fact that we lost a key member of the commission. There are a number of items that I put question marks on. And if there's items on the look ahead with people's names attached to them that they feel they're not likely to get to during the current work year, I think it'd be better to know that now rather than later. And if people are willing to fill in for some of the question marks, that would be useful to know too. So if you're able to speak to that tonight, that would be useful. If you want to get back to me by email after you've had a chance to look at it more, although I realize that the packet was a little bit late this time, so you may not have had as much chance as usual to look at it. But that's what I have in mind, is that the look ahead is more about what we're doing to execute through the rest of the work year, and less so about what's going to happen in the immediate next meeting or two. So does anybody have anything they want to say about that? Okay. Not hearing anything off the cuff, and I'd be happy to go eat dinner a little bit early. Tanya?
Thanks, Rick. I just wanted to take us back to the council's look ahead. There was a question earlier tonight about the TSP coming back in November. And I wanted to just report out that I did find it. It's the Transportation System Plan and Vision Zero resolution. And it says there will be this will be a presentation by Public Works staff and the Transportation Commission chair, providing background on the TSP update and the Vision Zero program. So the last time it was supposed to come before council, we didn't have an in-depth conversation about the Vision Zero program. We were supposed to, what was in front of us was whether or not to approve the contract. And then when that got set aside, we didn't end up having the detailed conversation about the Vision Zero plan. But Bob, your question about what is that looking like in terms of funding and timing is a really important one. And so when that comes in front of us and we do have this presentation, I will make sure to ask and see if any funding has shaken loose, I guess we would say, to be able to move on it faster than the next year's grant proposal process. Gary, did you have a question?
Yes, I just wanted to add that when the council was considering that issue, they were also looking to approve a work program as well as a contract with Kettleson. I'm hopeful that the council will choose instead to rely upon ODOT's contract selection process so that we have the opportunity to select from more than just one consultant, which was the case with the 2019 request for proposal. I believe there are other consultants that would be available through the ODOT consultant selection process that would have much better qualifications than Kettleson to do the work that is now required or will be required under the climate-friendly transportation planning rule, because it focuses on bicycles, pedestrians, and transit, none of which are particularly, in my experience, strong points on Kettleson. That's not to disparage them, just to acknowledge that there are other firms in Oregon that offer services specific to those kinds of modes that I think would bring more, a broader base of experience and knowledge. Anyway, I trust you won't be selecting a consultant in November. That's good.
No, we won't. But if you can send me information about what you were just talking about, so I have a little bit more detailed thinking, you know, what the council did last time was set that contract approval aside until the funding question was resolved of whether we could receive funding from the state. Since it was so long ago, there's a question of whether it would need to be opened up again anyway. But one of the big concerns that folks had was the public engagement process that's required for a TSP update, and the difficulty of doing that with the fact that we're still not out of the pandemic. So there's a number of conversations that are happening around what is the right timing and what is the best leveraging of financial resources to make this happen. Yep. But if you can send me the detailed information about that procurement process with the Department of Transportation, that would be helpful.
Okay, I'll do that. That's great. Thanks for the insights.
So Tanya, is that meeting still the 2nd of November?
Yes, it is. It's still listed for the 2nd of November.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks for bringing that back, Tanya. That slipped my mind. Anything else? Bob.
Thanks, Rick. Yeah, just I noticed that we have 2 attendees today. We're listed. 2 attendees kind of stuck with us the whole time, and both of them have expressed some interest in helping and getting involved. And I'm wondering, one of them provided a phone number. Do we have a process? If we were meeting in person, we would have actually collected some biographical information or some, I guess, contact information in order to reach out to them. And I wonder if there's a way that we can do that, because we don't actually have a way of seeing, aha, I now see a phone number for the second person. So
yeah, I'm actually copying and pasting all this right now.
Excellent, great, thank you.
But I wanted to ask you, are these chat scripts put away somewhere?
There is a copy, but they're not technically supposed to be part of the meeting. So, you know, I think we can get the information out. Also, folks can just email me at climate@ashland.or.us, and I can handle that information.
Coach Sandy at Gmail.
And I think it's worth saying too that we do have some open slots on this commission.
Yes, 3 of them, as a matter of fact.
We got lots of room.
So yes, but thanks to Jim and Sandy for coming in and attending our meeting today, and I hope to engage with you. There's lots of ways to engage. Thanks for what you do for the community.
Okay, thanks for noticing that, Bob. Anything else? Okay, I think we were going to adjourn. Thank you all. See you in a while.